Okay, welcome back to Moshe. Now that
Hello.
you are,
Shalom. How are
I
you?
wasn't sure what the delay was, but now I know what it was. We were waiting for you so we could start together. We're beginning a new section today. This is actually section 20.
I couldn't connect.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Didn't want to connect.
Well, you made it. Baruch Hashem.
Yeah.
So we're beginning section 20, not 19, but 20. The Chazan's repetition of the Amida, quite an interesting one. It definitely sticks out in the daily services. We're going to learn what that is all about. So just to put it into context, we're in the section of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which deals with prayer. And we're going through the sections of the prayer. And we are now at the repetition of the Amida. So we're about halfway through. And what we have left is if we forgot to pray, Tachnun, confession prayers, Torah readings, and concluding prayers. And that will bring us to the end of davening. But for today, repetition of the Amida. Here we go. So before we start reading the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch in English, I'd like to just give a little bit of an understanding of what this repetition is all about. So in the original Shulchan Aruch, he writes like this. Once the community has concluded davening, the Chazan repeats the Amida. Why? Because there may be somebody present that does not know how to daven, and therefore, for that person, he can listen to the Chazan, and the Chazan can, by him listening to the Chazan and answering Amen to the Chazan, he could fulfill the mitzvah in that way. Can you hear me? Yes?
We can hear you, but it went a bit funny for a second.
Okay, because I just moved on to my headset. I thought maybe the sound would be better because there's quite a bit of noise in the background. But here I am. So
That's fun.
Repeats the Amida for somebody that is unable to daven by himself, and that person can listen to the Chazan and can answer Amen and have in mind to be included, and that way the Chazan davens on his behalf. Now this only helps for somebody who is unable to daven by himself, which means that today, in theory, there wouldn't necessarily be a need for the Chazan's repetition of the Amida, because since people today are literate, and nowadays a siddur is not a commodity like it used to be when it had to be handwritten, so really anybody that knows how to read is able to just, if he knows what page to be on, he could go ahead and he could daven by himself. But if there's somebody that feels that they are unable to daven by themselves, the Chazan can daven on their behalf. Now, why does it only work for somebody that is unable to daven by themselves? Let's say I'm having a lazy morning and I say, look, instead of me davening by myself, I'll just listen to the Chazan. He'll have me in mind. He'll answer Amen to his brachos, and he'll daven for me. So the answer to that is quite obvious. It's because what is prayer? Prayer is a time where we ask for our needs, when we ask Hashem for mercy. And that's something that every person should do by themselves. When it comes to turning to Hashem and asking Him for what we need, it's something that we should do on an individual basis and not have somebody else do it for us. However, if a person is unable to do it by himself, then the Chazan can do it on his behalf. Now that said, it only works in the presence of a minyan. Why only in the presence of a minyan? So there are different types of brachos. Some brachos one person can make on behalf of somebody else, and some brachos one person cannot make on behalf of somebody else. So when it comes to these brachos, which is the Amida, it's the type that you can't have somebody else daven for you, as we just said. Each person needs to daven by himself. Even if you're unable to daven, still, since he already davened, so his prayer is for him, it's not for you. However, the power of the minyan enables the Chazan to be able to daven on your behalf if you are unable to daven by yourself. So that's really what the repetition is all about. It was instituted by the sages for somebody who is unable to pray. Through the power of a minyan, the Chazan can daven on his behalf. Okay. However, really, there's a lot of discussion. For example, if somebody doesn't speak Hebrew and he doesn't understand what the Chazan is saying, which would be the case for most Jews, at least outside of Israel, So even if the Chazan wants to have him in mind and he is answering Amen, it's still questionable whether that would work, since after all, he's supposed to be asking for his needs, and if he doesn't even understand what the Chazan is saying, it's difficult for the Chazan to be able to daven on his behalf. So what seems to come out from all of this is that once the men of the Great Assembly, the early sages, instituted the repetition of the Amida, since they did it with a level of Ruach HaKodesh, with a level of divine wisdom, some form of some level of prophecy, therefore then it becomes part of the davening, even if the reason doesn't seem so relevant, which is a concept which exists in halacha in general. There are a number of things. For example, in our shul, we make kiddush in shul on a Friday night. Now that doesn't really work because kiddush needs to be in the place where you eat your meal. Once upon a time, the guests used to eat in rooms adjacent to the shul, and when the chazan made kiddush, it did work. Today, we don't have those rooms adjacent to the shul, and so the kiddush doesn't really serve any purpose. But since it was instituted by the sages, we understand that even if the reason doesn't seem relevant, there is still something special about it, which is perhaps beyond our limited knowledge. And I would put the repetition of the Amida into that category. Although it was originally instituted in order to enable somebody who is unable to daven to be able to daven, nonetheless, since it was instituted by the sages, this institution remains in place even when the reason doesn't seem so relevant. So that's my little introduction to the repetition of the Amida from the original Shulchan Aruch, so you just have a bit of an idea of what this is all about. And now let's go through a few of the details. So the first halacha I would say is actually perhaps the most relevant and practical halacha, although a number of those that follow are quite relevant and practical as well. And here begins. When the chazan takes his 3 steps back upon completing his silent Shmoneh Esrei, his silent Amida, then he would wait there for a few seconds, as we've learned. Whenever we take our 3 steps back at the end of the Amida, we don't run away. We don't want it to look like we weren't interested in spending time with the king. So we take those 3 steps back and we pause for a few moments. So the chazan will do the same. And then after waiting the time it takes to walk for Amos, he would return to his original place, and then he would begin the repetition. Now that first opening line that we say, Hashem, please open up my lips, that the chazan can say silently. That's something private that he's just saying to Hashem. And then he begins aloud with Baruch Atah Hashem. I know that some like to also say that first verse aloud. Hashem Tefatah Tiftachu V'Yagid Tehilatecha Baruch Atah. I think that's more, maybe it's the Sephardic custom, but the standard Ashkenazi custom is that those words are said silently, and we start aloud with Baruch Atah Hashem, and we begin to repeat the Amida. And then as the chazan repeats the Amida, everybody should be careful to remain silent, to listen carefully, and to be attentive to what the chazan is saying, and to respond accordingly. To say Baruch Hu or Baruch Shemai after he mentions Hashem's name, and to respond Amen after every bracha. In fact, even somebody who's busy learning Torah needs to stop learning while the chazan is repeating the Amida, meaning everybody needs to stop whatever they're doing and to listen attentively and respond accordingly to the chazan. Needless to say that you must take care to avoid idle conversation. It's not the time to strike up a conversation during the repetition of the Amida. If it's not difficult for you, it is proper to stand as if you yourself are davening the Amida, the Shmoneh Esrei, your eyes either closed or following along in the siddur. That doesn't seem to be the standard practice to stand for the repetition of the Amida, but it gives us an idea of the holiness of this and of how focused we should be on that. There are some whose custom it is that after Kedusha, we'll think about it in a moment, they remove their Rashi tefillin, their one set of tefillin, that they put on the other set of tefillin, and that is not appropriate because right now we should just be listening to the chazan. Now, obviously, we're not here to judge anybody because sometimes it is their only opportunity. They may be rushing, who knows. But on a personal level, we say that even removing tefillin, which is a holy task, should preferably or should not be done during this repetition, so that our eyes and ears can be completely focused on the repetition of the Amida. Okay, so that was quite an important one about listening and following along. It's also a good opportunity for those that are davening in English, that are beginning to learn how to read in Hebrew. It's a great opportunity to familiarize yourself with the Amida in Hebrew as you follow along with the Chazan inside the Siddur. Okay. Now, since the Chazan has already davened his own prayer, and the only reason he's saying it a second time is for the benefit of the people listening, it is therefore required that there be at least 9 people listening to the Chazan and answering Amen. Otherwise, his blessings would be in vain. Because as I mentioned in the introduction, really every person should be davening by himself. And the fact that the Chazan is able to daven on somebody else's behalf, that other person that is unable to daven, is only through the power of a minyan, which means that if there's no minyan, then the Chazan is mentioning Hashem's name multiple times in vain, God forbid. Or he is saying blessings unnecessarily, meaning the whole repetition becomes not only useless, but a desecration to Hashem and his name. So the very dynamic of the repetition is that you have a minyan. And therefore, it's very important that before the Chazan begins the repetition, he ensures that there are 9 people that are able to listen to him and to respond, Amen. Now, this is different from even Kaddish. Why? Because when, let's say, a mourner says Kaddish or the Chazan says Kaddish, so the Kaddish is a unique prayer. As long as there's the presence of 10 people in the room, then you could go ahead and say the Kaddish, at least if you have maybe a majority of people that could respond. But the repetition of the Amida is not like Kaddish, because the repetition of Amida, it means you're repeating something you already said. So the whole nature of it is that it is in the context of a community. And that is why when it comes to Ma'ariv, which is the evening prayer, so if you have exactly 10 people in shul, and somebody is taking his time in his davening, he's really investing his efforts into his davening, and it's taking him longer. So the Chazan does not need to wait for that person to finish davening his silent Amida in order to say Kaddish, because Kaddish just needs the presence of a minyan, but it's not being said on behalf of the minyan. As opposed to the repetition of the Amida, since he already davened, the only reason he's repeating it is for the people. So therefore, when it comes to Shachos and Mincha, the Chazan cannot begin the repetition of the Amida until 9 people in the synagogue have finished davening and are available to listen to the repetition and to answer Amen. Okay. So are you with me? Did that make sense? Good. Okay. Now,
sorry, Rabbi, can I just ask one question? Let's assume there are 11 people.
Yeah.
And the 11th person is a little bit slower.
Yeah.
Would the Chazan wait for that person, or would he carry on?
He does not need to wait. Then it would just be related to the dynamics of the community. If maybe he's somebody who would be hurt if we didn't wait for him and everybody else was happy to wait, then he might still decide to wait. But that just has to do with interpersonal dynamics, just being in tune of trying to do what's in the interest of the whole community. But he would not be required to wait, meaning if that person had clearly told him, or he knew he doesn't mind if he's not waited for, on the contrary, he'll feel under pressure, then the Chazan can certainly continue. Exactly. Okay. Okay. So the Chazan should be careful where each time he finishes a bracha, not to begin the next bracha until people have had a chance to answer Amen. If he begins the next bracha right away, after, for example, completing the bracha Magen Avraham, he immediately starts the next bracha after Kippur. Since he's already started the next bracha, you can no longer say Amen because he's moved on. And then the Chazan will really be at fault for taking away the opportunity from the community to be able to answer Amida. Amida is a very powerful response, It stands for Kel Melech Nerman, the God, the King that is faithful. That's already another whole share of the power of Amen, and we spoke about it a couple of weeks back. So the Chazan should give people a chance to answer Amen before he moves on to the next paragraph. Okay, so we're pretty much running through the repetition. So we spoke about what it takes to start. We want to have at least 9 responders. We spoke about the Chazan giving people a chance to respond Amen. And now we'll speak about the 3 other hallmarks of or the 3 other unique sections of the repetition of the Amida. The Kedusha, when everybody stands and they say Kadosh, 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 which is close to the beginning of the repetition. Modim, which is towards the end. And then in the morning, the priestly blessings. So let's discuss the next 3 halachos, each of those 3 special prayers that are only recited in the repetition of the Amida. We have not heard them for a very long time, and please God, very soon we'll have an opportunity to hear them again. So when the Kedusha is said, a person should be careful to put his feet together as if he was standing on one foot, as it is written regarding the angels who say Kedusha, and their feet, plural, are a straight foot in the singular. So that's the first point. So really, when we say Kadosh, 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 we are glorifying Hashem's name. We are speaking about the holiness and the greatness of Hashem. And this is something that the angels are saying all day. And when we say it, so we should make ourselves resemble angels. And that's why everybody stands up when we come up to the Kedusha, and we must put our feet together, just as one puts one's feet together when one davens his private Amida, so too one should make sure his feet are together by the special Kedusha prayer. Also, as one says the words Kadosh, 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 and Baruch Kavod Hashem B'Koimai, and Yimlech Hashem, he should raise his body and heels upwards, raising himself towards Hashem. So I guess you won't see my feet, but basically, if this was my feet and those are my toes, and that's my heel, then you go up and up and up. So you lift the back of your heel up 3 times, raising your body as you say the 3 words Kadosh, 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 which means holy, holy, holy is Hashem, or elevated is he. And then again at the beginning of the next clause, and again at the beginning of the final clause. Okay. And it is the custom to raise the eyes upwards during Kedusha. Preferably, they should be closed. So that was as far as the Kedusha is concerned. As far as the next unique prayer, which we only say in the repetition of the Amida, which is the Modim, Modim and Afdullah. So Modim means thank you. And when it comes to that particular prayer, every person should say thank you in their own right. They shouldn't just rely on although they've already said it in the private Amida, and the Chazan repeats the Amida, just as he says thank you, we all make our own additional prayer of thanks. It's something that each person should do as an individual, not just to rely on the thank you that somebody else gave. When the Chazan reaches this bracha of Modim, the entire congregation bows and says the entire Modim D'Rabbanan. It's a little section in the siddur over there, special prayer that is recited only by the repetition of the Amida while in a bowed posture. If you're standing in the middle of the Amida, meaning if you're still in the middle of your private Amida where you're not allowed to speak at all, and you hear the Chazan saying Modim, then you would be allowed to bow if you're in the middle of a prayer. But if you're at the beginning or the end of a blessing, then you wouldn't bow, because we've said earlier that once the stage is instituted, then we only bow a total of 5 times at the beginning and end of the first blessing, and at the beginning of the end of the 18th blessing, and as we take our 3 steps back, those are the 5 times. If you would be at the end of any other blessing and you would bow, it would look like you are deviating from the institution of the sages by bowing at a time when the sages said that we do not bow. However, if you're in the middle of a prayer, then the bowing is not because of your own blessing, because blessings you only bow at the beginning and the end. Then it would be clear that you're just participating in the Modim prayer of the community. So you would bow slightly, but you wouldn't actually say anything since you are still in the middle of your private Amida. Okay, so that was as far as the Modim is concerned. Let's talk about the priestly blessing. Oh, we are over time. Sorry to keep you. Nice to see you all, and wishing you a wonderful evening. Please, if you ever see me going over, I do not want to be late. Please just tap on your